idea of framing of sustainability, as we all know, is an environment, right? But it's not just enough to say environment. It's about a viable, natural environment, okay? It's about not just the economy, but what kind of economy serves human, right? It's not about society only. What kind of society cares for a nurturing community? It's also about the overlapping idea of environment and society. How do we look for natural environment, but also how do we look for sustainable environment that humans have built? So the built environment, engineered environment, like buildings, like roads, like bridges, something with concrete that we have built, right? We look at not just about economic development that looks at the environment, the economics, but also how can we consume without destroying the earth. And also, most important, but which is not given enough attention and which is the focus of my research, has been how do we create not equal, that can never be done, but equitable social environment where everybody can bear the fruits of an environment, of a sustainable environment, a sustainable economic development, of a sustainable society. How can we create it? That is our biggest challenge. Right? So when we take all of this together, then we think, as research suggests, then we may have achieved sustainable development, right? So that's why, unlike in the 70s and the 60s and the 50s, where it was very much focused on environment, and even now people think of recycling as sustainability. Recycling is important, but it is a very, very, very tiny part of what we think about sustainability. It's more than just deforestation. Those are really important, but they cannot be the central part of the conversation around sustainability, right? So this idea about what are the trade-offs when you want something, something comes, something goes, what are the trade-offs? What are the compromise that we have to do and sustainably, when we think of real world problems? So sometimes those real world problems are also called wicked problems, right? Very hard to solve. So ultimately, to me and to a lot of us researchers who have been working in this area for 20 years, it's more than about preservation, much more. It is about how do we create conditions for prosperous human societies, for everybody, something that looks at their well-being. So this is a concept that I want to draw your attention to, the idea, the juxtaposition between vitality and integrity. So much, vitality is another word of saying basic needs. So much of sustainable development is focused on just basic needs: food, access to food, good health, security, water, shelter, good social relation, basic material for a good life. And that is really, really, really important. But the debate is, can we up it a little bit, right? Up the sustainability a little bit to make sure that, it is much more than that. It makes life wonderful. It makes life worth living, right? Gives us freedom of choices, gives us freedom of action. Can we create a sustainable world like that? But however, does that mean that some nations that are richer will do more and therefore leave the poorer nations behind? So this is up for debate, right? Can we go beyond basic needs? Is sustainability just basic needs, or is sustainability more than just basic needs? So I would argue that it has to be more than just basic needs. It has to be about the integrity and the well-being of human lives. But how can we do that? How can we do that? That is the challenge, right? So coming back to this idea, so how do we look at all of these concepts, and how do we then look at the prosperity of the human? So I just want to take those three concepts, environment, social, and economic, and take it a little bit further, just because I think it's important. So when you talk about environment, if you look at this, if you talk about environment basically is, what are the resources that nature gives us? What are the services, water, air, good air? What are the services that nature provides us? It's also called natural capital. And that's fine, that's environment. But when we talk about environment as it relates to sustainability, then we really talk about what is the limitations, what are the finiteness of natural capital, and what kind of constraints and what kind of limits does it impose on society? So we look at environment and we look at environment and sustainability. That is how we really have to think about it, okay? The same goes for the economy. So economy, just the basic definition of economy is, it's a way of producing good or productive work and how it's organized and how do we produce, how do we distribute, how do we consume goods and services. That's what economy is all about. But when we look at economy versus sustainability, then it is basically to improve our quality of life for everybody without degrading our resources, without greed. How do we do that? That we don't know yet, right? So this is the thing. And the last thing, again, society, just society alone is a study of culture, politics, individual psychology, institutions, social institute. That's what society is. But when we look at the nexus of the interaction of society and sustainability, it's more about how do we look out for each other? How do we respect human rights for everybody? How do we promote justice, fairness, well-being? How do we maintain human well? What is equity? How do we look at intra and intergenerational equity and social? And that is social capital. Right? So that is when we talk about sustainability as it relates to society, that's what we mean. Not just let's preserve the culture, let's preserve the politics, let's preserve the social institution. It is much more, can that preservation help the well-being of the individual? That is what we think of sustainability. The last concept I want to touch upon in this idea of sustainability and sustainable systems is this idea that we cannot think of sustainability in a vacuum. That sustainability exists within a very complex system. That sustainability is about very complex way of thinking, and there are elements of logic, rationality, and science behind it, right? So one of the ways we think of complex systems is that we have in our School of Sustainability and the college I work in, we do hundreds of millions of dollars worth of research on sustainability. We do lots of research on energy. We've got degrees in sustainability, PhD degrees in energy. Our graduate students, our faculty do lots and lots of work on energy, on themes-based, consumer energy, energy research, research on ecological systems, research on food systems, research on equity, research on gender, feminism, all of them around sustainability, right? So the way we're able to do that because we think of sustainability as a complex systems. And the governing concepts of this complex system science is that, number one, we think of it as it's a very holistic and transdisciplinary system. I'll come to that. I'll explain that a little bit. And because it is a holistic system, it's made up of many components, and each of the components interact. So, and because of this interaction, it produces more than the sum of its part, right? And number three, when these interactions occur, it also creates feedback loops, right? And the feedback that makes it keeps on making it much more complex. And some of the basic laws of science also applies. And to me, the idea of science, I come from a genetics background. I also am, but I consider myself a social scientist now. So I am a very much a Renaissance researcher. I do lots of research on many aspects in hard sciences, in the social sciences, and also in the humanities. I do that all. But the very traditional understanding of science is, you have to do math and you have to do, chemistry, physics, but science is much more than that. Science is discovery. Science is exploration. Science is finding out ways to answer research questions. That's what science is. Science is a logical way of thinking. So our ancient ancestors all were scientists too. How did they build homes? How did they cultivate? How did they feed? They did it through, so they were scientists that had never been to school, but they were very knowledgeable. So we have to really expand this idea of science. So this idea of transdisciplinarity of complex science is this idea of the expert knowledge, right? That you cannot solve today's complex, sustainable problems with just one discipline, right? It needs sociology, any problem, energy problem, it needs, you have to know about the politics and the policy. You have to know about environment, geography, political ecology, history, human health. I mean, you have to know everything. So there's this idea that we cannot be siloed, as they say, very disciplined. That is very 19th century, very even 20th century way of thinking. So how do we bring in practical knowledge in the field? You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have a master's. You don't even have to have an undergrad degree, right? Knowledge is really not the purview of those who have gone to colleges, right? Knowledge resides in those who have practiced. Knowledge resides in the wisdom of elders. Knowledge resides in those of us who have gone to colleges. Knowledge resides everywhere. So how do we bring all of this together to really solve the problem, right? So so I want to give you this illustration of a complex systems. So if you look at the carbon cycle here, right? So if you just look at the blue cycle, if you just look at the blue pathways, this is basically, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So what happens is, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, there's respiration happening, photosynthesis happening from the plants, and the plants absorb the carbon dioxide. At some point, plants decompose, and then decomposition happens. If there is more compaction happening with these plants, the carbon in it forms fossil fuels, okay? In some other cases, the carbon, they produce more plants, photosynthesis happen, which is consumed by animals, and things like that. So this is the natural carbon cycle. But we know that's not the case right now. We know that humans have interacted, right? So we consume, there's transportation, through deforestation, through forest fire, we add to the carbon dioxide. Then also, and then also we burn fossil fuels, we add to the carbon. So if we are really to understand this complex carbon cycle in the atmosphere, we really have to look at it from a complex, interdisciplinary, holistic, transdisciplinary way, and through a socio-ecological systems, because this is a complex systems. We can't just say, I'm going to, not cut trees and therefore, I'll be more sustainable. No, the carbon cycle is dependent on deforestation, but it's just one component, and there are feedback happening. And then there are interactions happening in all of these, and all of those need to be studied. But unfortunately, in our teaching, in our colleges, in the teaching of our lectures, in the slides that we produce, we don't do that. It's too much work. So this thinking in our head about how we need to teach sustainability, how we need to teach sustainable science is not there yet. And hopefully, instructions and training like this will be helpful to make sure that students understand it and relate it to themselves at the individual level and at the societal level.